And as you said, Tracy, over to Arpit now. And yes, Arpit, I'm not so good at this. The number of times I've introduced Arpit, I think I should know this by heart. So Arpit heads open source networking, edge, and IoT at the Linux Foundation. He is the face of Linux Foundation that we all know really, in this area. So he's been taking care of LF networking, LF Edge, Magma, ORAN, SC, Dent, Sonic, and many more projects, organizations, sub-organizations. And well, he's been in the industry for many years, and we have been working a lot with the Arpit and looking forward to continuing and increasing our collaborations.
Okay, thank you.
Normally the clicker should work.
Okay, am I good? All right. That helps. All right. And thank you, Tracy, for setting me up. I technically don't need to present. I mean, it was all there in her chart. So Irfan asked me to present on a specific topic called 5G Super Blueprints. It also answers one of your questions, which is how do we pull it together? So organizations like OAI, Linux Foundations, and others, right? We can bring communities together and we can set up neutral governance. And we can set up events, we can set up workshops, we can set up things that help bring use cases forward and help you all solve it. What we can do is tell you where you should focus on, meaning this is the way to solve it. That's not our job, right? So just keep that in mind. With that said, some of you may be new to LF networking. I just want to take 2 minutes to introduce that and then go straight down into what is called 5G Super Blueprint. For those of you who are not familiar with Linux Foundation, we are beyond Linux and we host about 800 plus projects. And these are open source projects, hardware, software, standardization, mostly software, interoperability, in either a technology area or a market that needs disruption. So it could be security, networking, cloud, automotive, blockchain, edge, IoT, etc. Right? And so what I'm going to focus on today is mostly on the networking and the edge side of things. LF networking is one of the largest top 3 sub-foundations within Linux networking, which basically is a coalition to foster open source and solutions for the networking industry, right? No surprise. And it's all 3 networking, right? Cloud networking, telecom, and enterprise networking. And our mission is to just keep creating the data plane, the control plane, and the application analytic orchestration plane to allow for interoperability and solutions, okay? The 2 things that I want to highlight is the world of open source has shifted, okay? 10 years ago, there would be like one project like Open Daylight, and everybody would rally behind it and be very excited that we have solved SDN and a control plane challenge, right? Now, the problem is shifted to, it's a collection of multiple projects, multiple independent projects that solve specific problems. And then we need to come together to create an ecosystem on how these projects interoperate. And so if you think of it, it is an open source or an open community or an open collaboration for integrating and interoperating multiple things. And I said things deliberately. They don't all have to be open source software. They could be hardware. They could be test gear. They could be just APIs. They could be proprietary hardware, proprietary software. Doesn't matter, right? But it needs to be integrated together, okay? So in our sub-project, we have projects like ONAP and Anuket and FDIO and Open Daylight. And there's tons of those that have seen significant growth. And they've seen growth because they add value to an end user like an AT&T or a Verizon or a T-Mobile. And to vendors that participate, all the top networking vendors participate in this ecosystem to create the software. Keep in mind, this software, I hate to break it to you, but it's just plumbing. Okay, it's non-differentiated software. And it's over 10 to 15 million lines of code. So if you're a startup, don't recreate it. You're not going to make money out of it, right? It's just plumbing. And plumbing is based on standards, and 80% of the code is plumbing in a solution. So it sounds boring, but that's where the operators spend most of the energy and effort. Okay, so keep that perspective in mind before we get to what needs to be done for 5G super blueprints. So 5G super blueprints. Okay, and the word super is important here, and I'll tell you why. So if we put everything in perspective, I've just put some sample projects here, right? And everybody in networking should have memorized this, right? You come in through different types of access, mobile, residential, or data center enterprise. You come into an edge, you come into a service provider edge, and I'll talk about the edge in just a minute, up some cloud up in the core stack all the way into the applications. Very standard, very simple. The challenge is, how do we pull it together and create a full open source based end-to-end solution that allows for interoperability? And keep in mind, there is no red hat for networking. Okay, just keep that in mind. No single vendor has either the appetite, skills, or the approach to pull it all together. It's just not going to happen. So we need the community to step up and integrate. Okay. If you look at the edge specifically, there's a lot of action going on here. And one of the most important, and this is, by the way, done in our sister organization called LF Edge, and there's 10 plus projects there. But one of the most important things they have done is defined edge. And I want to highlight that here as well. I know there's the Zoom thing on the bottom part here, but that's called user edge. So if you're working on edge compute, which is an extension of 5G, don't use terms like near edge, far edge, thin edge, thick edge. Those are all relative terms. The community does not appreciate that because you have to define them yourself. Use standardized terms that the community has come up with. This is a Wikipedia style definition, and there's only two terms: a user edge and a service provider edge. A user edge is operated by the user, and a service provider edge is shared. A user edge has three implementation types: a constrained device edge, a smart device edge, and an on-prem data center edge. So this could be microcontrollers, embedded compute. A smart device edge is really an IoT gateway, and then obviously on-prem data center edge, which again, control of the user, and it has multiple implementations. And then of course, on the other side of the last mile, you've got a couple of options on below a RAN or at the smart central office. Again, it's only edge compute if it has 20 milliseconds or less of latency, right? If a sensor wakes up and registers things once a week, that's not edge compute. It could be an IoT application, but not edge compute. Just keep those kind of basic definitions in mind, because then we'll talk the same language. And then of course there are projects that are IoT framework. Now what LF Edge is trying to do again is try to unify the markets that are helping edge compute, whether it's the cloud version of edge compute, cloud edge, the telecom version of edge, IoT version of edge, or enterprise version of edge. That's what frameworks are. EdgeX Foundry is a framework, Fledge is a framework, Akraino is a blueprint integrator type, which I'll talk about in a bit. So the reason I took this a little bit detour on edge is there is a lot of work going on in edge computing as well to enable 5G and telecom networks, right? And those things show up as blueprints, straight blueprints, not super blueprints, just blueprints. So a blueprint, and it's a very technical term, right? Because it's a declarative configuration. It's not just a marketing buzz. It's a declarative configuration that's repeatable. It is set up with a specific release. So if you look at Akraino, for example, which is one of LFEd's projects, there's about 25 blueprints. Everything from cloud gaming to rec to buffering, to connected vehicles, to IIoT predictive maintenance blueprint. It has hardware, software, and the software loads that pull it all into that specific use case. So if you are, one of the other ones that got a lot of traction is what is the PCEI, or Public Cloud Edge Interface. So Equinix was the one who was leading this. What they've done is they've said, some of these standards and interfaces are not defined between a public cloud and an edge. Let the open source community define it, document it, and use it as a blueprint. Okay, so again, keep this in mind. Now, some of these blueprints go into a super blueprint, and which we'll talk about in just a bit. Okay, and so how does it all pull together? The way it pulls it all together is you got a whole bunch of projects. Linux Foundation, non-Linux Foundation, doesn't matter, right? Like there's a whole bunch of open source projects that, by the way, most of them are implementations of standards, 3GPP, ETSI, GSMA, TMF, doesn't matter. And then the three markets, enterprise, service provider, and end user, utilize those projects for those three use cases that are documented there. And then particularly for enterprise, it's not one size fits all. There's a linear list of priorities that we are attacking at the community level, with industrial being the top one, then energy, then retail, like in that order, okay? And as you saw from Tracy's presentation also, US government is heavily influencing in the right way, in an upstream way, the plumbing of all of these projects in open source, and that's what's the 5G Super Blueprint. So we announced this in March, or April, I should say, at the Open Networking Edge conference as an initiative. It's not a project, it's an initiative under the Linux Foundation Networking. And it's an initiative to bring community members together to create interoperability that is repeatable, okay? And how do you do that in a sense where, not a single vendor can influence the solution of these things. So let me just explain what it is at the 10,000-foot view. Okay. At the bottom, you got the platform, and you got the interop, and you got the integration. Right. This is the plumbing, and that's what the blueprint aims to do. Right. But it is determined by what is called anchor use cases, and these are extremely high-level use cases. There are 5 of them right now: ultra low latency, broadband, voice, slicing, private networks, etc. And then on top, you have the workloads, the XNFs, the CNFs, VNFs, or workload in an enterprise manner, which get used by the people on the top or the industries on the top, right? So Indico, for example, and some of the other initiatives that are NSF and US government and DoD, they all sit on top. They have their specific workloads for FirstNet or for whatever the application, but they, at the end of the day, need a connectivity tissue with applications that are running interoperable software in an open manner. Because one of the things that the US government, specifically DARPA, and the head of DARPA, JMS mentioned it in one of his keynotes, is we're going to utilize everything open only. It is more secure, and we know why. There's been enough research on that. So this is why this is so important to do it in the open. Okay. So if I double click that last bottom thing, then you get into the gory details of how it all comes together, right? Where everything from Zephyr, which is like an RTOS, comes into a couple of projects that sit at the constrained device edge, into a blueprint under Akraino, up the stack into FDIO, DPDK, all of those things into a packet core, and then the management stack is on the side with the control plane. Now, keep in mind that the only thing I'll add here is the blueprints are forward-looking and they're based on Kubernetes, right? While there is the interoperability with OpenStack that is managed by other projects inside of Linux Foundation, the blueprints themselves are focused only on Kubernetes, right? And cloud-native environment. Okay, so again, as I said, it's a collaboration platform where you can integrate, interoperate real world use cases. We have people for that. We have a community. We have the governance. We have the labs. You can bring your own lab. You can bring your own use cases. The most important thing is, collectively, how do we solve common problems, right? And then, of course, as everybody knows, open source is all about duocracy. So if you're doing things in open source, you're by default influencing the direction of the blueprint, okay? And so multiple initiative comes together, and that's what 5G Super Blueprint is. What it is not is also very important. It's not a product. It is not something that you can buy from the Linux Foundation. We're not here to sell anything, as a nonprofit. It is not a project. Okay, so projects have TSCs, they have governance, they have very strong voting for a roadmap. That's not what it is. That's why it's an initiative, and it's not a commercial distribution. Absolutely not. But what it does, and what we have heard from the likes of US government or an AT&T and a Verizon or a DT, is it gets end users 70-80% of the way there, okay? The rest of the 20% comes from partnerships with vendors and system integrators. And then whatever proprietary comes on top, differentiation is fine, okay? All right, so the reason this came about was the US government's program called OPS 5G. OPS stands for Open, Programmable, and Secure. This was a DARPA-funded activity. There are 8 performers on that. What they're trying to do is make sure that the slices that go for 5G deployments are secure. There is DDoS mitigation projects that are coming to Linux Foundation for enabling that. We work with USCs and a lot of others right on this. But at the end of the day, they are heavily involved and participating in the LFN Super Blueprint. The one thing they did, which is, to credit to the entire DARPA, DoD, and US government, a year ago when we envisioned this project, they kept it on the side because it's government and you got to be very careful, etc. But over the last 1 year, they are following the best practices of open source, which is upstream first. Okay, and that's why they're doing everything in LF networking. Okay, which is excellent. And keep in mind, these blueprints are based completely on standards and specifications. I won't go into all of this, but there's a lot of collaboration that has happened, and we'll continue doing that. Okay, so the last 2 slides are mostly around what is the status, how can you participate. This is what the blueprint behind the hood is, right? There's a UNH lab which is hosted, where the components of the blueprints run, like ONAP and some of the SMO. SMO, I think, was shown by Tracy as well, the service management and orchestration. This is the ORAN component that is based on all the microservices modules from ONAP. That's why you can see that there's a link between ONAP and ORAN with all the A1 and O1 interfaces already tested and plugged. But that particular component is coming from ONAP. And then, of course, there's the CUDU, there's the fabric, and then the application. In this case, IBM is participating with the application. This is just one example, okay? Doesn't have to be this. You could have multiple examples, but the concept here is to get enough integrations complete between projects, right? And you can't do it all at once. So can you do ONAP and Open Daylight? Control plane and orchestration plane? Yes. Can you do Magma and ONAP? Yes. Can you do another open source packet core? That's what they're looking at as a diversity. Can you do some of the other things? The ORAN software community, which we host at the Linux Foundation as part of ORAN Alliance, has not yet integrated in here, but there are discussions going on how to do that. So that's kind of the high level view of project integrations. And what's coming up is at the One Summit, which is happening next week in Seattle in person. If you've not registered, go ahead and do that, please. The entire software community and the Blueprint community will be there. And they're all actually showing a demo of a factory floor Industry 4.0 demo that's based on this blueprint. The important thing is the roadmap is very aggressive, and we invite all of you to participate, including core diversity, where I think Irfan and we were talking about the OAI core. So, we can look at that, help you help this community integrate that into the blueprint as well. Plus, there's a lot of other use cases that are being done. Okay. And the way this is structured is there are two work groups. There's the infrastructure and the technology build out work groups, and then there's the expansion for use cases kind of a work group. And it's not easy to kind of narrow down, but that's what the community is. We just manage the governance of it so that one company or one vendor does not take this initiative into a direction that suits them, right? That's where the LF comes in. Okay, so that's pretty much what I had. I am, yeah, good. So questions, yeah. Trying to keep 5 minutes for questions, right? And there is a mic. The one there, okay.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
It's super interesting the lecture. I have a question. We're facing, this solves a lot of our problems. Where going to end up with that and adhere to the standards is very important. We have ETSI standards, UGP, TM forum, etc. But what happens when you have conflicting standards? Because there's a lot of communities doing standards for the same things, and sometimes it's conflicting.
Yeah, so that's a good question. We have seen that in our community, and the philosophy, in fact, I would argue like 5 years ago.
Sorry to interrupt, but we can't hear the question. So if you could repeat it,
Sure.
paraphrase before you answer.
Okay. I thought the mic is connected, but thank you. I will repeat the question. So the question was, this is very interesting, and we believe that it should be the deployment or integration should be standard-based. But what happens if there are conflicting standards, whether it's 3GPP or ETSI or whatever, and how do you solve that? That was kind of the question. Okay. So let me sort of start off 5 years ago. There was a big war between open source and standards, right? Specifically in here, where it's one or the other. And, to David Marr's credit from Qualcomm, he helped us and me author a white paper called Harmonization of Standards and Open Source. That was kind of the turning point of the industry, where we then extended the partnerships with pretty much all the standards, right? And so the philosophy that we have agreed, and whatever you name, right, ETSI, GSMA, TMF, MEF, you name it, right? We have a very strong formal partnership with the Linux Foundation. And the philosophy is very simple. If a standard exists, code it. If it doesn't exist, code it, and then upstream into a standard, okay? And our members do that on a regular basis. I won't go into the details of which TMF APIs and which HC and all that, but that has happened. And then if there is a conflict, it gets worked out in the working group in open source, because at the end of the day, the implementation is what determines the interpretation of the standards. And a lot of the conflicts are not whether this standard is better or this standard is better. It's like, hey, did you code this flag to be a 1? And Cisco took it as 1 is this, and Juniper took. That's kind of where the problems are. And overloading the variables without getting too much into detail, that's where the problems are. So what we help solve is when you code it, by default, that becomes a standard, and then you go back and do it. But if you find specific things, go into the ONAP TSC as an example, where a lot of these standards have been implemented, and bring it up, and the community will help solve. Yeah, just shout, I'll repeat it anyway.
We get the blueprint from the Linux Foundation website?
Yes, so where do you get the super blueprint from? So yeah, just go to Linux Foundation networking, and then under that, there's the wiki for all these projects. And if you're a member of it, you should be part of the receiver list on almost all these updates. Okay, other questions here? Okay.
Simple question. We know that open does not necessarily equal to secure, right? So because open is anyone can contribute the software. So what does Linux Foundation do to ensure security of software is people contribute?
Okay. Okay, so the question was, open is not secure, does not equal to secure. So what does Linux Foundation do to help secure the open source software? Okay, when I said open is more secure, that was kind of the DoD research and all that. So there's papers published that it's the more eyes paper, right? I don't want to go into that. But you're right that open doesn't mean it is secure. So there's a very strong process and a very strong focus on security of open source. We have a foundation that just got announced called OpenSSF, and it is set up for the end-to-end lifecycle management of open source, right? So what we have done there is it's beyond vulnerabilities. So it's not just CVEs and things like that. That is, table stakes. You got to do it. But it includes what is called lifecycle management of open source projects, which includes identifying the critical components, running automation tests and scripts. And there's about a 150 or 100 checklist, 100 bullet checklist. Have you done this? Have you done this? Can you trace this back? What packaging is included in this, right? And then eventually, have you implemented SBOMs? So software bill of materials. And if you want to check the status of open source, you can just go to security.lfx.org or something. It's a Linux Foundation security dashboard. You can go down into the project and see where the project is on the security lifecycle. SBOM has been implemented for quite a few projects. In fact, for the Linux Foundation, if you look at all the 800 projects, the networking projects are the most furthest ahead when it comes to implementing some of these SBOM changes and some of these requirements for security, primarily because we all know if there is no connectivity, nothing else matters, right? So that's kind of this. Okay. Other question? Yeah, there.
So if I don't know if I'm speaking over somebody.
Just a minute. Go ahead. I'm going to point the mic down. So go ahead, speak.
Oh, I just wanted to say, building on what you're saying, open doesn't mean secure, but monolithic and closed means you can't tell. So this is what we say in the OAI Alliance.
Yeah, great point. Thank you. Yeah, and by the way, the head of security subcommittees for LF networking is Amy, and she's one of the security specialists from AT&T, right? So, okay. One last question is what I was told. Yeah.
You said that the Linux Foundation has a lot of sub-projects and projects, and it's not working by Red Hat. It was founded by Red Hat and that the actually project goes to safety. Why is the OAI not part of the Linux Foundation?
Oh, they are.
Oh, they are.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
I was wrong.
No. I mean, they're like Irfan is on the board of Magma as the open packet core. So absolutely. What we have not done yet is we have not added as a community, as in not me, but as a community, collectively, we have not kind of done the diversity of packet cores yet, right? Which is kind of one of the roadmap items. Yeah. Okay. Last question. Okay, one more. I'll answer it short.
All right, thank you. Just wondering if you may share some kind of your one of the major challenges of integrating all these disparate projects into and solution.
Okay. So the question was, what is your view on the challenges of integrating these projects end to end, right? So I'd say there are three challenges, right? It always comes down to the developers and people, and it comes to lab resources, right? Who contributes, which lab, where does it come from, right? And always overdose of work. How do you prioritize the use cases, right? How do you, as a community, say this is the most important use case? And so For the labs, we're looking at members, and developers, we're looking at all of our members, right? Which is, again, most of, I mean, if you're not a member on LFN, right, like I would like, okay, why are you missing out? But most of you are. The question is, do you have the people and the resources to contribute? And then are you aligned as a vendor community and an end user community with the use case priorities, right? Like the 5 that I showed for Super Blueprint, they are completely aligned. Everybody thinks, and they're based on 3GPP, you know, really 16, 15, 16, 17. And that's what we get. So we better solve that. So that's kind of the how I would say, you know, we see as challenges. Nothing technical. Okay. Right. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Arpit. Yes, and as Arpit was saying, you know, we do work quite closely together. Projects that are under Linux Foundation governance, Magma was one of them in the Magma Core Foundation. And the OAI is in fact a big contributor there for all the testing part. And, you know, the core expertise of OAI are really in RAN, core network. So there we have a number of collaborations that are already in place. But you know, this we believe is only going to grow with the kind of interfaces that we are now you know, getting in ORAN and other places. So we'll be very closely working together over the years to come. Thanks again, Arpit, for a great talk.